RB Research Station on Curacao. Unfortunately, we had a shark just had a little nibble on our internet cable. So we've shooed the shark away, we've patched the cable, and now we're back online hopefully and streaming to you. Those are some of the issues you have when streaming live from the coral reef. This is an Ask Me Anything session from AXA Coral Live, and delighted to have schools from a number of countries taking part. We have Miss Hauschel's class at Pennington Middle School. We have Mrs. Ramage's class at Union Point Academy in Kentucky. We have Callender Primary School. We have Boulder Academy in Isleworth, London. And we have Coleridge Primary as well. Wonderful to have you all with us. What we're going to do over the next half an hour, I'm sorry that we had that issue with the shark and the cable. We're going to sort of try and rip through as many questions as we can, and Ellie's going to come and join me as well. So back to the rarest coral I've seen. I think that one of the really difficult things is coral ID. On one expedition I was working with, found not quite a new species of coral, but a new instance of a coral deep down on the Great Barrier Reef, and so that was a fantastic thing to find. But I've got some examples of coral. These are not quite so rare, but we have an example of star coral here. We also have it's like a sort of flowering coral, this one here, with the coral polyp. For those of you who were looking at the coral incredible edible polyp, that was the first session we did, and it's the next session that we've got on today. And then this maize coral, which I'm just gonna hold up here. And these corals are made by small tiny animals called the coral polyp, and they make up, take limestone out of the water and make these incredible shapes. What impact is plastic pollution having on the coral? I know that there are instances of big bits of plastic causing physical damage to the reef and also smothering the reef. So we talked in earlier sessions about the coral polyp and what the coral animal needs. And so it gets its food in two ways. So it gets its food both with its tentacles, the little tentacle animal that lives in here, coral polyp, and it takes sort of small animals from the water, the plankton. It also is very clever insofar as it has a symbiotic relationship with algae, and that algae provides it with sugars. But to do that, to give it sort of 70 to 90% of its energy, that algae needs sunlight. So if you've got a big bit of plastic bag over the top of this, that's going to smother it. There is also some research going into to what extent plastics can transfer coral diseases around between different parts of the reef. I think that's a fairly new area of research. I'm not quite sure what conclusions have been found yet. But also plastics harm not just the coral itself, but also the wider ecosystem. So those bigger bits of coral causing physical damage to a wide range of species. Ellie, will you be joining us shortly? In a minute. Perfect. Wonderful. We now have Union Point Academy. So we'll do the sort of pre-submitted questions and then we'll come on to the live chat. Have any of you studied the same reefs over the course of several years, or is this a new study? So what we've been doing with Coral Live over the past years is join different research teams in different places. We've been in Bermuda, we've been in Timor-Leste before, and finding out what the research happening there is. So we haven't been a part of a research team that has been on one place for a long time. We've just come to Curacao this year. We hope to be coming back next year. And so we're going to start building that relationship and look at how things might change over time. One of the best ways to find out, to look at changes over time, on Wednesday, we have the director of Carmarby, Dr. Mark Vermey, and he will be talking about the ecosystem around here, and he'll be able to let you know any changes he has seen over the years. Going to Boulder Academy in Isleworth, London. When we have Shireen. When did you know that you wanted a career in science, and how did you achieve it? Shireen, don't tell anybody else, but I came to science very late in life. I didn't study it through school very far, and I didn't do it at university. I studied history. And I really came to science when I was asked to go and help an Arctic expedition communicate, and we were living on the sea ice of the northern coast of Canada, and I got stuck in a tent in the Arctic for 6 weeks with a group of marine scientists, and suddenly they opened my eyes to a whole new world. And I found it absolutely fascinating that, you know, there's 70% of our planet was ocean. Yes. There are these incredibly important little creatures. There's a creature called a copepod, about the size of your pinky fingernail, and there's an estimated sort of 1,350 billion of them. That's 18 zeros, and I'd never heard of it, this incredibly abundant creature. And I suddenly became, I think in the course of sort of 6 weeks at minus 40 degrees, became a massive science geek. I was really interested in the natural world growing up, but that's what really inspired me. And I couldn't believe that at school I never learnt about science that was happening. It always seemed to be science that dead people had found out. So I spent the past few years trying to connect science that's happening now. Just behind us here is a wet lab, and we'll have scientists over the course of the next 2 weeks coming and explaining the research. In the Arctic we work with researchers, so I really want you to learn from practicing scientists and see what they're doing. Evie from Boulder Academy. What is it like swimming with sea animals in the coral reefs? Ellie, come and join us. Let's. I mean, you can share sort of your experiences of this, and I'll sort of. Evie, I mean, I think swimming with sea animals. I think what the most amazing thing is that if you had that much abundance on land, you'd fall over yourself. Yeah. If you were, you know, just sitting somewhere and there were 100 different animals of different colours all around you, almost within touching distance, all shapes and sizes, it would be the most amazing, you know, spectacular in the world. And when you're underwater, I mean, the only time I've ever had that is been a butterflies in Tibet, of a cloud like that. That's one single experience. But on the coral reef, it is like being in a paradise. Not always. We'll talk about some damaged reefs in a bit, but on those really pristine reefs, you go beneath the surface and it's like you're in another world, like you're in something. It's almost like has that sort of abundance of sort of Jurassic Park. You feel it is like a different world. Amazing. I mean,
absolutely, no, completely agree. It's the number of different species, the biodiversity, that's really amazing, because you can see, if you started to try and count the number of different things, it would be like being surrounded by the butterflies that you mentioned, and parrots, and eagles, and elephant,
yep,
and plants, and all sorts of things, all in a small space. And some really healthy coral reefs, when you're diving through, it's almost like you're in a crowd, in a very busy city, trying to push your way through all the different shoals, thick shoals of barracuda. In fact, the photo that's on the website of me is where I was diving and I actually had to stop and wait because a thick school of fish came past, and it was almost like a bit of a junction, because I was with some turtles and some fish and we were heading this way, and then this big school of fish came past and we all had to stop, almost like at a red traffic lights, at a stop sign, and wait for this whole traffic to go past. And once that whole school of thousands and thousands of fish had gone, then we looked left and right, and then it was our turn to go, and then we could carry on. So I was sort of treading water with some turtles for a few minutes, and that's quite a surreal experience.
Brilliant. And we're just going to go back to Pennington Middle School, and there's some questions about sort of learning the skills to explore this underwater world. How long did it take you to become certified as a diver?
Oh, that's a good question, and it depends. There are lots of different ways that you can become certified. So if you want to just do a trial dive or figure out if it's for you, because it's not for everybody. Some people don't like the sensation of being underwater and they get a bit scared, but it really shouldn't be scary because it's an amazing feeling. Once you get used to that, you can do a 2 or 3 day introduction course. Very simple. Now that doesn't mean that you're qualified to go out in the ocean. You certainly can't go diving on your own, and it requires a lot of support and a lot of safety, but that will get you in the water. What I then did was I said, well, this is brilliant and I really want to do this, so I'm going to invest some time and I'm going to study, and I did a full course with BSAC, who are the British Sub-Aqua Club. There's lots of different organisations. You may have heard of PADI, which is an international diving association, but I did the BSAC one, and that was about 8 months, and it involved exams, maths exams. I had to learn about pressure and depth. I had to learn all about the equipment, how to take it apart, how to put it back together again, all the different safety things of what to do when things go wrong. And actually, people think that diving is dangerous, but because it's dangerous, it ends up being one of the safest sports you can do, because there are so many precautions and everybody takes really great care when they're diving. So my initial qualifications was about a year, and then I've specialised, so you can then do extra courses in things like underwater photography. Yep. Or cave diving, so I'm qualified to dive in caves, or wreck diving, night diving if you're somebody that wants to see the coral spawning, which is happening tonight, and those teach you the extra skills you need to dive in particular specialist scenarios. So
you've got that, I mean, 8 months a year sounds like a lot of time, but you've got that shorter thing where you can get your initial certificate in
a few days, in a week. So it's great. A lot of people do that when they're on holiday. So they might go on holiday for a week or two, maybe somewhere like the Red Sea, or Turkey if you're in Europe, or Florida or Miami. And there are courses there where you could do every morning of your holiday for 5 or 6 days, and you can get your beginner's diving certificate. And then as long as you make sure you're going with a reputable company that's got good health and safety, then you can dive anywhere in the world. But if you want to then be able to dive more extreme environments or more remote places, then you need to kind of work your way up. But everybody should do a trial dive while they're on holiday for sure, if you get the chance.
Amazing. Another question from Pennington Middle School, sharks.
Yes.
Of course. What kind of sharks have you seen on your dives?
All of them.
All of them.
Well, not all of them, because there's quite a lot of species of sharks, but a lot of different types of sharks. So the great whites, bull sharks, nurse sharks, reef sharks, fox sharks I do like because they've got a long whip-like tail that they can get you with. Hammerheads. Yes. They're really quite special. All sorts of different sharks. Yeah, and that's a good thing about when you are fully qualified, you can dive in lots of different places all over the world, and it means you can see different types of reef. So here in the Caribbean we have a lot of reefs that have reef sharks, the clue is in the name, but also nurse sharks and bull sharks, quite a lot here. Don't see so many of the great whites, probably, luckily. I don't think Jamie would like the great whites so much. I love great whites, but not a lot of people do, because there was a movie a while ago that people didn't like about shark, so
well, I think they like the movie.
Yeah, people People don't like sharks because of that movie. It was very, very influential, but they are amazing, amazing animals.
I mean, I think just to dwell on that, I mean, it did give a very sort of poor view of sharks, and you know, I often ask, you know, school groups, do they know how many people die from shark attacks each year? And I don't know whether we can get any sort of quick answers coming through. And you know, people come up with, you know, 100, 200, you know, obviously these incredibly dangerous animals with big sharp pointy teeth and all that kind of stuff. Rows of big sharp pointy teeth. And they go, well, you know, is it 100, is it 1,000, is it 50, is it this? And then you let them go, well, you know, okay, actually it's normally between sort of 15 and 20 a year. And they go,
yeah, I think last year was 8.
8. And then you
more people are killed by falling out of bed on a Monday morning than are killed by sharks every year.
Well, it's like, I mean, 47 people die in vending machine related accidents.
Exactly.
On it. I mean, and it's you know, it's not funny for those, but you know, it is absurd, that comparison.
And also the other thing to think about is how many sharks are killed by people every year.
So how many sharks die in human attacks each year?
Exactly, and that is hundreds of thousands.
Well, I mean, it's way beyond that.
It's astonishing.
It's. I mean, the latest estimates we're looking at 100 to 150 million a year.
It's really, when you look at it that way, it's quite scary.
So very, very different way of looking at things. So let's see here. How deep are coral reefs found?
Oh, good question. Yes, and again, it depends on the type of coral, the species of coral, and how much they rely on photosynthesis, and how much they therefore require light to make their food. But the different species that we were talking about earlier can go down to 3,000.
Well, I think you know, if we the broad coral world. I mean, I think that, you know, there's different layers in the ocean depending, and they're really defined by two things, by light and by pressure. So the corals of Finding Nemo fame, that kind of coral reef,
garden-looking coral reef.
Yeah, that's sort of probably 0 to about 40. That shallow reef, 0 to 40 meters down, and then from about 40 to 120, 150, maybe a bit deeper, you've got what's called the twilight zone in the ocean. You've got the mesophotic zone, and there you've still got photosynthesizing corals. But on Tuesday next week, we've got Dr. Pim Bongartz, who's an expert on this part of the reef, will explain to us a bit more about how they have adapted to this part of the reef. But of course, you've got corals all the way down to about 3,000 meters, and not necessarily photosynthesizing, because corals get their energy, as we said before, from tentacly, you know, catching stuff, and the shallower ones from photosynthesis. I mean,
and that's really interesting. As soon as you've lost the light, deep down up to 3,000 meters, you've got this really murky world of sediment and silt, but there's a huge amount of nutrients in that. So how have these corals adapted to be able to still survive down there, even though they're not able to photosynthesize?
Yeah, so we've got, I mean, the very famous Scottish coral reefs, the Lophelia reefs off Mingulay. So if you're in Scotland and you've got a, you know, ROV, a robotic submarine, you can go down and see those. So where are we next? We've got Class 5R at Coleridge Primary, who've got a bit more of a sort of like when you're on a liveaboard type trip, and a liveaboard trip is when you're going out to a far off reef, and you don't come back to shore every night. You live on the boat for a number of weeks. Do you? And Charlotte would like to know: do you pack anything specific from home?
Good question, Charlotte. Well, you've got to have all your dive equipment, which is can be provided on the boat. I bring my own so that I'm comfortable and I know how to use it, so I have all my own equipment. Actually, really, it's about bringing home comforts. So depending on, you know, bringing a good book to read for when you're waiting in between dives. You have quite a lot of downtime between dives, because if anybody knows anything about diving and pressure, every time you go down, you're putting your body under quite a bit of pressure, and you're building up what's called nitrogen in your system. So you can't dive all the time, and if you've done a lot of diving, you need to wait on the surface for a few hours or maybe even a few days to allow your body to get back to normal before you can go back down again. So good book, definitely. Camera, good camera equipment. I do things like I have a lucky headband that I always wear so that it just stops my hair getting tangled in the dive equipment. So it's just personal things. There's no specialist specific equipment that you need other than all your dive gear, of course, and otherwise it's just personal comfort.
Great. Tony from Boulder Academy would like to know what conditions are best for coral to grow well in.
Oh, good question. And Boulder Academy, big shout out to you guys, because I've spoken to you before and you're a fantastic school. Yeah, so this is a really important one as well, because coral is quite sensitive and has certain requirements for how well it grows. So things like you have to have the right amount of light, so that the coral can photosynthesize. You've got to have the right temperature, so if it's too hot or too cold. Some corals are better suited for slightly cooler water and some are warmer water. They like the water to be nice and clear, so not too murky, not too full of silt or sediment. The water's got to be as clean as possible, as healthy as possible, so not so much toxicity or oils, lotions. It might be things like fertilizer runoff, sewage runoff as well. So there's lots of things that we're putting into the water that are harmful, that make the water quite contaminated, and then the corals can't do quite so well. And it does sound as if that means that the coral seems quite fussy, and it will only grow if the conditions are just right, and it has to be the right temperature and the right pressure and the right light and all of this. But actually, if you think about it, it's no different than you and I as humans. We don't like to be in very, very cold conditions or very, very hot conditions, and I'm sure those of you who've ever been somewhere very cold or very hot, you struggle if it's, you know, outside of your comfort window. And the same thing, you've got to have enough food, haven't you? If you don't eat enough or you've eaten too much, then too much of the wrong thing. If you're surrounded by very musty, the air quality, for example, is heavily polluted or very musty and not fresh, you wouldn't be very happy either. So it's the same sort of conditions really as any living animal would want, as clean and as unpolluted as possible.
Great. I think that so just a few more questions from here that we have. What shampoo do you use when you're on the boat?
Oh, brilliant question. Yeah, so this one is really critical because as I was just talking about what corals like to do or don't like to do, any pollutants or any chemicals that are not natural can be quite harmful for the coral reef. So the shampoo that I use is free of any sulfates, it's free of any plastics, it's free of phthalates, it's free of any sorts of toxins, and it's an entirely natural organic shampoo. Same thing goes for your conditioner, your body lotion, sun cream, insect spray, anything you're putting on your body, because as soon as you're in the water those chemicals are then coming off your skin or off your hair. So I use shampoos that are completely organic and it's natural ingredients, so it might be something like a lemon juice or fruits, fruit sugars, and those instead, coconut oil, things like that, which is organic and it won't harm the coral or the life in the ocean.
Fantastic. And last question, why are the coral reefs fragile?
Oh, very good question. I mean, I'm not sure whether you mean physically or sort of in terms of the system themselves. Physically they can be quite fragile because, as you've seen, they're made up of very, very tiny, thin little projections which are very, very delicate, and any physical damage or pressure is going to literally break those corals to pieces, so they can physically be broken down by people standing on them or by storms or strong surges and tide, that sort of thing. But the systems as a whole are quite fragile because, as I said earlier, the corals need those very specialised environments in which to grow, and at the moment we're changing those environments, so the water is becoming warmer, tides or storms, strong currents are becoming stronger, the water is becoming more polluted in places, so we do have lots of pollution, of sewage and fertilizer going into the water. So all of those things are going to harm the corals, and because coral is a community, if you harm the kind of base coral can't grow, then that means that the reef itself is affected, because the other organisms that live together in the reef are also affected. So it sort of spreads quite quickly, the damage, you know, just like a food web, which we're going to be learning about tomorrow, on Wednesday. Sorry.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much for all your questions. 5 minutes with a live investigation, the incredible edible polyp.